The tincture in Varric's cup caught the firelight wrong, the same way the healer's vial had caught it 4 days earlier, and I understood, with a cold and sudden certainty, exactly what I was looking at before anyone else in that hall did. "Do not drink that," I said, loud enough to carry, and watched Irik's hand freeze halfway to his mouth. Varric's face did something small and involuntary. A flicker of alarm quickly smoothed over, and I knew, in that instant, that I had just named the one thing he had been counting on no one in that hall recognizing. I did not know yet whether I had spoken in time. I only knew I had spent my last coin once already trying to save this man's life, and I was not about to watch a second attempt succeed where the river had failed. Let me tell you how I ended up in that hall. Because it started 4 days earlier, in a river cold enough to burn. I was 24, a weaver's daughter in the village of Hollowmere, and I had gone down to the crossing that morning for water the way I did every morning, with considerably more worry on my mind than usual. Because the coin in my pocket was the last I had until market day, and it was meant for rent, not for anything else. My mother had raised me alone since my father's death, the two of us stretching every coin further than it wanted to go. And I had learned early the particular arithmetic of a household with nothing extra in it, which meals could be smaller, which mending could wait another season, which small comforts simply were not going to happen this year. I had walked to that crossing 1,000 times, with exactly that arithmetic running quietly in the back of my mind. I had never once walked away from it, having spent the very last of what I owned. I found him face down in the shallows, half tangled in reeds, his horse nowhere in sight, and I did not think, pulling him free of that current, about who he was or what it would cost me. I only thought about the fact that he was not breathing, and that I had watched my own father drown in a river, not unlike this one, and I was not going to stand on that bank and let it happen twice. I got him onto the bank and pressed hard on his chest the way an old healer had once shown my mother, and when that alone did not bring the water up, I ran, soaked through and shaking, toward the travelling healer's cart that set up near the crossroads every 3rd day, and spent my last coin, every piece of it, meant for a roof that would now go unpaid. On a small vial of restorative tincture, the healer swore would clear his lungs if anything could. It worked. He coughed up river water and drew a ragged, desperate breath, and I remember feeling, in that single moment, more relief than I had felt in years over anyone, stranger or otherwise. I do not remember much after that. I remember the cold finally catching up to my own body, the exhaustion of the run, and the fear and the effort all arriving at once, and I remember someone's arms, and very little else. I woke in silk sheets. I want to be clear that nothing about my life had prepared me for silk sheets. I lay there for a long, disoriented moment, certain I had died and been mistaken for someone considerably more important, before a woman in a healer's apron noticed my eyes open and let out a small, startled sound. "She is awake," she called, to someone beyond the door, and within moments a man I did not recognize entered the chamber, tall, composed, studying me with the particular careful attention of someone assessing a puzzle he had not expected the morning to hand him. "You are in Stonemere Palace," he said, without preamble. "I am Doran, the king's second. You saved his life 4 days ago at the Hollowmere crossing." I sat up too fast, and the room tilted alarmingly. "The man in the river. He is, I leave, recovering, considerably more so than he would be without your intervention." Something in Doran's face eased slightly, though not entirely. "You should know, before anyone else explains it to you less gently, that the man you pulled from that river is King Eirik of Stonemere, and that an old law of this land now binds the two of you together in ways neither of you had any say in choosing." "What law?" I said, my voice considerably steadier than I felt. "A life debt claim," Doran said. ancient, rarely invoked, and absolute. Whoever saves a king's life at the direct risk of losing their own is owed a debt the crown cannot simply dismiss. And until that debt is formally settled by the council, the one who saved him cannot leave the protection of the crown that owes it. You are not a prisoner, precisely, but you are not, at present, free to simply walk home either. I did not understand, that first disoriented morning, exactly how large a complication I had just become. I would understand soon enough. I asked Doran, before he left me to rest, the question that had been circling underneath every other thought since I woke. My family. Do they know where I am? I have a mother in Hollowmere who will assume the worst if I simply do not come home. A rider was sent the same evening you were brought here, he said. She has been informed you are safe, recovering under the Crown's own protection. I would not have left that unattended. I felt something in my chest ease slightly at that, though not entirely, because safe under the Crown's protection and free to go home were, I was beginning to understand, two considerably different conditions. Eirik came to see me himself, later that same day, and I understood, the moment he entered the chamber, exactly what kind of man I had pulled out of that river. He moved the way I imagined mountains would move if they ever bothered to, slow and deliberate and entirely certain of the space he occupied, and yet there was something careful in the way he held himself in that doorway, as though uncertain whether he was owed the right to simply walk in. I am told I owe you my life, he said, and I am told, in the same breath, that the debt now traps you here regardless of what either of us wants. I find I do not know which fact to apologize for first. You could start with the part where I nearly died of the cold saving you, I said, and work your way up to the part where I apparently cannot go home now. Something flickered across his face, brief and startled, the closest thing to a laugh I would come to learn he allowed himself easily. That is, I think, the first entirely honest thing anyone has said to me since I woke in this bed myself. I did not do it to trap either of us, I said. I did it because you were not breathing, and I could not stand on that bank and watch it happen the way I once watched my own father drown. Something in his face shifted at that, softened in a way I had not expected from a king. I am sorry. For your father, and for the debt this law has placed on you, without your consent. I did not ask for it any more than you did. I would like that understood plainly, before anything else about this situation grows more complicated than it already is. I did not know, sitting in that borrowed silk-sheeted bed, exactly how much more complicated it was about to become. I remained at Stonemere far longer than the council's formal proceedings alone accounted for, because Eirik, once recovered enough to stand unassisted, made no particular effort to speed the debt settlement, and I found, with some private embarrassment, that I did not mind the delay nearly as much as I had expected to. Those first days taught me more about a king's life than I had ever wanted to know. Eirik ruled Stonemere the way I imagined most men his size ruled anything, through sheer unhurried presence, rather than volume. A king who did not need to raise his voice, because the room had already decided to listen before he opened his mouth. Around me, though, that unhurried presence kept slipping. I caught him twice forgetting the end of a sentence midway through, watching me instead of whatever formal matter had brought him to my chamber that day. And I found I did not mind being the reason a king's composure occasionally misplaced itself. His wolf, weak in those first days from the near drowning, attached itself to me with an intensity that mortified him considerably more than it bothered me. It refused to settle for any hand but mine when it needed tending, growled softly at anyone else who approached his sickbed too quickly, and once, memorably, dragged an entire blanket across the room to deposit at my feet in the middle of a formal physician's examination, an act so undignified that even the stone-faced court physician had to turn away to hide his own laughter. I do not know what has gotten into him, Eirik said, mortified, on the third such occasion, watching his own wolf refuse to release the hem of my sleeve. "I believe the technical term is gratitude," I said, though it does seem to be expressing itself with considerably more drama than the situation strictly requires. "It has never done this before," he admitted. "Not once, in my whole life, has it attached itself to anyone the way it has attached itself to you in 4 days." I did not know what to do with that observation, so I simply kept tending the wolf, and let the observation sit between us the way I would learn. Over the following days, most true things between us liked to sit, quietly, unforced, until one of us finally said them plainly. The most memorable incident came on the 6th morning, when the wolf, apparently deciding that gratitude required a physical offering, dragged an enormous joint of roasted venison clean off the kitchen's serving table and deposited it, with visible pride, directly at the foot of my bed, scattering 3 startled kitchen maids and 1 very unamused steward in its wake. Eirik arrived moments later, drawn by the commotion, and stood in the doorway surveying the scene, his own wolf sitting beside a stolen joint of meat, tail wagging with an enthusiasm no king's composure had ever survived witnessing in public, with an expression caught somewhere between horror and helpless affection. "I would like it on record," he said, "that I have never once stolen meat from my own kitchens to impress anyone." "Your wolf appears to feel differently about the strategy's merits," I said, and could not keep the laughter out of my voice, and watched something in him ease at the sound of it, as though my laughing at his expense were somehow the very thing he had been hoping for all along. It was Doran who explained, more fully, exactly how tangled the situation had become. "There is a betrothal," he told me on the 5th day, choosing his words with the particular care of a man delivering news he suspected would not land gently. "Arranged 18 months ago, to the eldest daughter of the Vashdor house, brokered largely by Lord Varric, who has served this council since the old king's time. It secures trade rights along the eastern passes that Stonemere badly needs. Your life debt claim, unresolved, now legally supersedes it, and Varric is not a man who accepts an obstacle to his own careful arrangements gracefully." "I did not ask to become an obstacle," I said. "I am aware," Doran said. "I would simply ask you to be careful regardless. A man who spent 18 months securing an alliance does not enjoy watching a weaver's daughter unmake it by accident." I did not fully understand the warning's weight until I met Lord Varric myself, 2 days later, in a corridor he had clearly been waiting in. He was pleasant in the particular way that makes a threat land harder than open hostility would, complimenting my composure, my modest bearing, the admirable quickness of my actions at the river, before arriving, with practiced smoothness at the point. "It would be a kindness to everyone," he said, "if you were to formally waive the life debt claim. The Crown would compensate you generously, of course. Considerably more than a weaver's daughter typically sees in a lifetime. It would spare you the burden of a court entirely unsuited to your upbringing, and spare the kingdom a diplomatic complication it can ill afford." "That is a great deal of concern for my burden," I said, from a man I have known for considerably less than 5 minutes. Something in his smile went very still. "Consider it, all the same," he said, and left without waiting for an answer. I found Eirik that same evening and told him plainly what had been suggested to me. "He has approached you already," Eirik said, his jaw tightening in a way I had not yet seen from him. I suspected he might. I did not expect it this soon. "Should I be considering it?" I asked. "The waiver. It would solve your betrothal problem cleanly enough." He was quiet a long moment, and when he answered, his voice had lost the careful formality he usually wore in front of anyone but me. "I do not want you to waive it," he said. "I have spent 5 days telling myself that wanting you to stay is simply gratitude, or the wolf's confusion, or the strangeness of the debt itself. I do not believe that any longer. I would like you to stay, because I have not stopped thinking about the sound of your voice telling me you would not watch it happen twice, and I find I am considerably less interested in a betrothal that secures trade rights than I am in a woman who spent her last coin on a stranger. I did not have an answer ready for that, so I said nothing, and let the quiet hold it instead. The way quiet had held most true things between us since the day I woke in silk sheets I had never asked for. If you want to find out whether Rosalind ever managed to go home at all, and what nearly finished the job the river started, stay with me through to the end of this. Follow along so you do not lose the thread of what happens when an old law traps two people together who never asked for any of it, and one of them starts wondering if he minds. I began, in the days that followed, quietly asking my own questions about the accident that had put Eirik in that river at all. Mostly because something about the timing of Varric's visit to me had not settled easily in my mind. It was Doran, checking the stable records at my urging, who found the detail that finally mattered. The horse that had thrown Eirik near the crossing, according to the stable master's own log, had shown symptoms consistent with a rare sedating route in the days before the ride. A route not naturally found in Stonemere's pastures, but kept, in small, careful quantities, in exactly one private stable in the kingdom, belonging to Lord Varric himself. I sat with that discovery a long time, understanding, with the particular cold clarity of a fact rearranging everything around it, that the man who had approached me so pleasantly about waiving my claim had very likely arranged the very accident the claim now protected me from. Something in me that had spent 5 days simply adjusting to a strange new life stopped adjusting quietly. I brought the stable log to Eirik myself. His face, reading it, went colder than I had yet seen it. He nearly killed me, he said, to clear the way for a betrothal that benefits his own trade interests as much as the Crown's, and then approached the woman who saved me from his own scheme, asking her to erase the one piece of leverage standing between him and finishing what he started. He will not accept losing that leverage quietly, I said. Not if he was willing to go this far already. Then we will not give him a quiet way to take it back. His jaw set in the particular way I had learned, over those days, meant a decision had already been made. I am done letting my own counsel decide the shape of my life while I recover from what one of them very nearly did to end it. We did not move quickly. Doran cautioned repeatedly against confronting Varric with anything less than proof strong enough to survive his own considerable skill at deflection, and so those next days passed in a careful, quiet accumulation, stable hands questioned individually, physicians' records cross-checked against council attendance the week of the ride. Small threads gathered one at a time until they might hold real weight. I found the waiting harder than I expected. I had spent my whole life reacting to trouble the moment it appeared, rather than watching it approach slowly, and the patience this required did not come naturally to me at all. Varric moved again within the week, once the waiver request had clearly failed, and the stable log threatened to reach the full council. He came to me himself, one evening, with a cup of warmed wine he claimed was a gift from the kitchens, apologising, with practised smoothness, for the bluntness of his earlier approach. I did not drink it. Something about the careful way he watched me lift the cup, the faint sheen catching the firelight wrong, reminded me too closely of a healer's vial I had once spent my last coin on, and I set it down untouched, citing a headache I did not actually have. He left disappointed, and I understood, watching him go, that whatever he had intended that cup to do, it had very nearly worked, simply because I trusted a stranger's kindness more readily than I trusted my own instincts. The second attempt came 3 nights later, in the Great Hall, during a formal council gathering where Varric, cornered by the stable logs mounting evidence, apparently decided a more direct solution had become necessary. Not for me this time, but for the king himself, delivered through a cup passed across the same table where the life debt's fate was about to be formally decided. That is the scene I told you about at the very start of this. The tincture catching firelight wrong, my own voice, louder than I expected it to be, telling Eirik not to drink. The hall had gone utterly still in the half-second after I spoke, every eye moving between the cup, Varric's face, and mine, and I felt, for one long breath, the particular terror of having spoken a truth loudly enough that there was no way to take it back if I had somehow been wrong. I had not been wrong. I watched that certainty land on Varric's face at the same moment it landed on mine, and understood we had both just run out of quiet ways to resolve this. Doran had the cup seized and tested within the hour, and the poison found within it matched, precisely, a rare compound recorded in Varric's own private physician's stores, the same physician, it emerged under questioning, who had quietly supplied the sedating root used against Eiric's horse weeks earlier. Varric's composure, so carefully maintained through every prior confrontation, finally broke entirely under the weight of two matching pieces of evidence laid before the full council in a single evening. "I built that trade alliance for this crown's benefit," he said, backing toward the hall's edge as guards closed around him. "A weaver's daughter and a debt no one asked for nearly cost this kingdom everything I secured for it." "You nearly cost this kingdom its king," Eiric said, his voice gone very quiet and very dangerous, twice, to protect an alliance that profited your own house as much as the crown. "I would ask the council to consider whether a man that willing to poison his own king over an inconvenience was ever truly serving anyone but himself." He had no answer ready for that. I do not think he had ever expected to be named so plainly, in front of witnesses, by the very king he had tried twice to remove. Varric was stripped of his council seat and his standing that same hour, his household investigated in full, and the betrothal to the Vashdor house was quietly dissolved once it became clear exactly how it had been secured. He was escorted from Stonemere's halls before dawn, in considerably less finery than he had worn delivering that cup of warmed wine. Eiric found me afterward in the same chamber where I had first woken in silk sheets, holding the small empty glass vial I had kept, unthinking, in my pocket since the day at the river. "I have spent 9 days trying to prove to you that this was never only a debt," he said. "I did not intend nearly losing my own life a second time to be the demonstration." "It worked anyway," I said, "though I would ask you not to repeat it. I do not intend to make a habit of it." He looked at the vial still in my hand, then at me, something in his face finally losing the last of its reluctant, careful formality. "I do not know how to properly court a woman the law has already bound to me. I have spent 9 days trying to work out how to make you want to stay for reasons that have nothing to do with any debt at all." "You already worked it out," I said. "You told me plainly that you wanted me to stay before you had any proof it was safe to say so. That is the only thing you ever needed to do." When he kissed me, careful and certain, a man who had spent 9 days calling gratitude by every name except the true one, I felt something in my own chest, some quiet disbelief I had carried since the moment I woke in a bed I had never asked to sleep in. "Finally settle." He claimed me before the full restored court a month later, his hand steady on the old iron circlet as he set it on my head himself, in front of every noble who had watched an ancient law drag a weaver's daughter into their king's life and stay there entirely on its own merit. Doran stood near the front of that hall, looking, for the first time in 9 days, entirely unworried. My mother travelled from Hollowmere for the ceremony itself, arriving 3 days early and spending most of that time, I was told later, quietly interrogating every servant in the castle about whether her daughter was truly being treated well or simply told she was. She found no evidence to the contrary, though I suspect she would have said so regardless, having decided somewhere on the journey that any king who owed his life to her daughter had better earn the privilege of keeping her. 6 months later, I stood at the same river crossing where I had once spent my last coin on a stranger, holding a letter from my mother in one hand and the small glass vial, empty still, in the other. My mother's letter asked, carefully, whether it was true her daughter, once so worried about a single missed rent payment, was Queen of Stonemere now. I wrote back that it was true, and that the roof in question had been repaired anyway, along with every other roof in Hollowmere, because a king who owed his life to a village had not forgotten which village it was. Doran had stopped bracing every time Varric's name came up in council proceedings, mostly now that the man sat stripped of standing rather than seated at that table. The old life debt law, at Eiric's own insistence, had been formally revised to include a clear path to release for anyone who wished to take it, so that no future rescue would ever again trap a stranger against her will. And Stonemere's court, once so easily steadied by a patient schemer's careful arrangements, had grown considerably more careful about mistaking ambition for loyalty. Eiric's wolf had not, in all those months, grown any more dignified about my presence. It still refused to settle for anyone else's hand when it was tired, still trailed me through the castle corridors with an attentiveness the court had long since stopped finding remarkable, and Eiric still pretended, every single time, to be faintly embarrassed by behaviour he had privately admitted. More than once, he had no actual desire to correct. I had, in those months, become something of an informal advocate for Hollowmere and the villages like it, sitting in on council sessions whenever matters of rural allotments or river safety arose, insisting, more than once, that a kingdom which nearly lost its king to a river crossing owed its people considerably better maintained banks and considerably faster access to healers than most villages had ever been granted. Eiric had not once argued the point. He had simply signed whatever I put in front of him, which Doran found endlessly amusing and never once let either of us forget. I turned the small empty vial over in my fingers and thought about the woman who had run barefoot to a healer's cart 4 days into an ordinary week, certain of nothing except that she was not going to watch a stranger drown the way she had once watched her father. She had no idea that freezing morning, that spending her last coin on a man she did not know, was about to become the richest decision of her life. She only knew she could not walk away from the riverbank. I like to think she would be glad now that she never learned how to leave a drowning man to the current. Do you think Eiric's wolf would have chosen me the way it did if I had simply been a passing stranger, or had some part of it already sensed exactly who was pulling him out of that water? Tell me your theory in the comments. And if you want to stay at this crossing a little longer, comment the vial and I will know exactly what you are asking for. Thank you for standing on that riverbank with me. Wherever you are listening from tonight, welcome to Stonemere. Follow along for the next story from this side of the border. There are more kings in these hills who owe their lives to someone who never meant to become the centre of one, and I intend to tell you every one of their stories,